The standard saying, heaven conquered and the world was born. Life begins and ends in the dust you form. contagious. Come and join us in His praise. Bless the name of Jesus. It's for freedom we are saved. Freedom is contagious. Come and join us in His praise. Bless the name of Jesus. It's for freedom we are saved. Freedom is contagious. Come and join us in His praise. Bless the name of Jesus. It's for freedom we are saved. Look down, our chains are on the floor. Look up, we're not hindered anymore. Look around, He's already won the war. Look up, look up, look down. Our chains are on the floor. Look up, we're not hindered anymore. Look around, He's already won the war. Look up, look up, look up. You are the Word at the beginning, one with God the Lord Most High. Hidden glory in creation, now revealed in you are Christ. What a beautiful name it is. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a beautiful name it is. Nothing compares to this. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus. Didn't want heaven without us. So Jesus, you brought heaven down. Sin was great, your love was greater. What could separate us now? What a wonderful name it is. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a wonderful name it is. Nothing compares to this. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus. Death could not hold you. They'll tore before you. You silenced the boast of sin and grave. The heavens are roaring, praise of your glory. For you are raised to life again. You have no rival, you have no equal.
Well, good morning, Woodcrest. It's so great to see you all this morning. Great that we're all here on time, which is not always a given after daylight savings, so give yourselves a pat on the back for that. If we haven't met, my name is Micah Wright. I'm one of the leaders of our Next Gen ministry, which is our young adult and college small group. So if you're someone at that age, come talk to me after the service. I'd love to get to know you if you're interested in joining our group, and I can answer any questions that you may have about that. If you're a guest with us this morning, we're especially glad that you're here joining us, and we have the Welcome Center located out there in the lobby where we have a volunteer that can answer any questions that you have or just tell you a little bit about the things we have going on around here. If you haven't noticed, in the seat back in front of you, we have these orange cards, which is our Woodcrest Attender form. And a lot of us maybe filled this out, but if you haven't, that'd be great to fill this out during the service. And you can put that in the bucket on your way out, where we'll have volunteers with buckets. And this is just for our database that we're updating. And we won't flood your email or anything. We just want to make sure that we have everyone's information when we send stuff out. And the last thing I want to mention is we have our photo directory. So at the luncheon last week, we took photos in the gym. And you just hold up your name and you pose for a photo. It's kind of cool for our church directory. We're doing that again if you missed that. So that will be located in the gym after the service. So please check that out if you did not get a chance to do that last week. Well, Matt Gordon is back with us this morning, and we're continuing our series, Re-Story. But before that, the band's going to lead us in one more song. So let's stand and sing together.
I've been held in your hands from the moment that I wake up until I lay my head. I will sing of the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of I love your voice. You have led me through the fire, darkest night. You are close like no other. I've known you as a father. I've known you as a friend. I have lived in the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so good. With every breath been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, and I will sing of the goodness of God. Thank you so much for singing with us. You can have a seat.
Morning. So this is the second part, a sequel from what we talked about last week, so we'll play a little catch up. Last week, we entered a dollar theater where tickets were $1. $1. Like $1, it's amazing. Anyway, the screen lit up and the story started about some boys who were chucked into a furnace. And our popcorn was ready and the floors were adequately sticky, and we watched and we watched and we watched, and we never saw any boys and never saw any furnace. It was like The Godfather, where you're like 2 hours in and they're still at that wedding reception. Like, I've known marriages that have lasted longer than that wedding reception. Just keeps going. But we had to stay there because the text of Daniel 3 made us an offer we couldn't refuse. It offered a ruler, a kingdom, and an idol. And we had to watch as power and nationalism trickled down, how common people bowed to an unholy cause. Because what we realize is this isn't a way back there, once upon a time tale. It is a 2023 Sunday in America story. Since the fall of man, there's been a rise of idols. We can think about our modern idols. You can do so right now. You can think about political figures or money or materialism or celebrities or causes. But here's a word of caution. Before we go any further, I think it's important that the heart is tricky. The Bible puts it a different way. It says it's deceitful above all else. Let me ask you this. Have you ever loved someone who wasn't any good? Like someone you hung out with that was going to get you in trouble, going to get you in prison, going to get you in jail? Are you ever addicted to something that you knew had a grip on you and might harm you? And in both of those instances, the same things happen. You fight, you lie, you cheat, you steal, you sell, you convince, you barter, you fake, anything to protect your beloved, the thing that holds you. You also distract. So when I say idols of this world, you start thinking of your neighbor's idol or the idol of that political party, the other one. The idol of the sinner, as if you don't sin every day. You're deflecting and distracting so that you can keep bowing to your entertainment or your drink of choice or your materialism or your sports fix or your sacred ideology. You still got mud on your forehead and you lambast all the weak-minded bowers. Don't be deceived. When we talk about these things, don't be deceived. Don't make it about everyone else's stuff. Jesus says a thing, right? Like there's a plank in your own eye and you're worried about the speck in your neighbor's. We said last week, the heart is an idol factory. And when I said that, I was talking about your heart. I was talking about my heart. Let's not think that, I have the one heart in all of mankind that hasn't operated this way. It's an idol factory. So last week we met this guy who's an idol factory maker, King Nebuchadnezzar. And he's a big deal guy with a big deal job. And he's in a city called Babylon. Okay, Babylon is typical prophetic, which means every civilization will follow some of the rhythms of Babylon. And he's in charge of Babylon. It's kind of a dark place, and he makes this big old statue, and he says, you're going to bow to this statue, or you're going to go and be thrown into a furnace. And some of you here last week are like, well, you just said everything you said last week in like 3 minutes, and last week it took you 40. I don't know. There's more money in a sequel. Practice makes perfect, I guess. So we're just going to pick right up. We got a lot to cover. This story is so deep, so interesting. We'll leave a lot on the table, but here we go. We'll try to get to some of it. Daniel 3, 8 through 12 says this. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, may the king live forever. Your majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all that jazz must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. There are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, your majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. So this idol is made, and it's pleasing to the eye, and the music plays, which is pleasing to the ear, and the emotions get all churned up, and you're supposed to bow down, and we get introduced to our boys for the first time, and they're standing while everyone else bows firm. Now, I want to speak here to the Christians in the room. There are some people who probably consider themselves Christians, some people who don't, whatever. To Christians in the room, as we read Daniel 3, I want to say this, relax. We're going to read this and we're going to see some guys who are different for God. And we think in our society we want to be different for Christ, and that's good. But what can happen to us is we get this persecution complex. Where it's like, they were persecuted, so now I have to go persecuted. And I went around my neighborhood and I kicked in 17 doors and everyone was mad at me. Persecution. Here's what I want to say to Christians in the room. I'm going to unpack your faith just shortly. This is what you believe. You believed you were messed up. You believe everyone else is too. And the only fix for this wretched, suffering-inducing brokenness is for a flawless God to become a person, born of a virgin woman, live for 3.5 decades, then be killed for blaspheming his Godfather, literally, but rise again before ascending to an unseen heaven to which he'll someday take us. Why I read that is like, that story doesn't need any more weird heaped on it. All right? That's like having a steak and be like, you know what the steak needs? More steak. And then putting another one on top of it. And a quick note to the unbeliever who just heard that and is feeling very satisfied because the oddball just got exposed. The name of the game of life is truth. It's not safety. It's not normalcy. It's not status quo. The claims of Christ and Christianity are extraordinary, but here's what I would say, they better be. Like, my neighbor's a really good guy, but I don't trust in him with my eternity. I'm just not. Yeah, he can mow my grass every now and then, but I'm not giving my eternity to him. I'm not giving it to Augustine or Lincoln or MJ or Mozart. Very good humans or very skilled humans, but cosmic games call for cosmic stakes and cosmic answers. My Messiah better be audacious, better be weird, better be a bit extraordinary. But here's my point in saying all this, that God is good enough to test your faith. Now, if you're sitting here and you're like 75 and you're like, he's never tested my faith, that's probably because your faith is in the world. If you believe just like the world and your faith is in the world and its ideals and its idols, yes, you won't be tested. You won't have any persecution come your way. But if you have faith in God, it will stand out. It has to. This is the great command. Jesus says, what's the greatest command? He says this, love God and love people. That's what it is. Our cultural messaging is much different than that. Our culture is all about self-love, self-protection, self-promotion, self-deification. Jesus says, bow to God, and while you're down there, wash some feet. Which means you're going to be weird just for believing that. We don't have to add really strange language to the mix, impressing people with words they don't understand. We don't have to have a vacant expression or wear odd clothing or have some virtue signaling signpost. Oh, you wear one cross, I wear 3 because it's more biblically accurate because he was buried next to 2 other people and they were on the crosses together, so that's what I like. We don't need that. We really don't. I have a fish tattoo on my head because I just want everyone to know it. Oh, when I go to restaurants, I always order in Aramaic. I don't speak it, they don't speak it, but just, it feels right. It's like, we don't need to become Ned Flanders in our world. All right? Because the love God, love people is strange enough, and it will find you out. Challenge will find you if you love God, love people. And some of you sitting there be like, oh, I'm just naturally weird. Well, do your thing. That's okay. But some of you are like heaping it on, and it's like the people aren't mad at you and persecuting you because of your beliefs. It's because you kicked in 17 doors. Don't be that person in your office, in your neighborhood, and then say, well, it's because the Bible claims. No, the Bible doesn't call you to be that way. It calls you to love God and love people. Verse 13 says, furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. I love that rage of Nebuchadnezzar. He's got this rage. 3 guys defy him, and he's enraged. You know what this says to me? How bad gods we make. Think of God, the first time you disobeyed, 3 of us disobeyed, he just chucks you in the fire. How good is grace, mercy, long-suffering? We have that kind of God. As people, we make little petty gods. But despite the rage, something happens. Verse 14, Nebuchadnezzar said to them, he calls them and he says to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? This is odd, all right? What's odd is they're having a meeting about this. They're having a conversation about this. Like if you get nothing else out of this, here's a general rule of thumb, believer, unbeliever, like I think this will help you in your life. You can write it in your notes, profound statement. I think it's spirit-filled. Here it is. That if you're with someone who burns other humans, that person's a madman. Don't be with them. They jumped the shark. They're crazy. Like if you're with your uncle, the uncle's like, all right, we're going to hang out, we're going to barbecue, then we're going to watch the big game, and then we're going to burn some of our neighbors. It's like, say uncle at that point, all right? And then say uncle to the police and get them over. That's not cool. This guy is not cool. He wants to burn people. He's got some issues, okay? He's a strange dude. And he's killed many more people for much smaller offenses. So why in the world is he calling these people to a meeting? He ought to be chucking them straight into the furnace, right? Well, remember a couple weeks ago, Kelly was up here. She talked about this guy named Joseph. Do you remember the Joseph story? Joseph was sent into Babylon. It was a different Babylon. Again, they're all types of Babylon. It was Egypt. And he rose in Egypt to become number 2. And through his intellect and through his governance and all this stuff, he saves a bunch of people and endeared himself to the ruler. Then there's a guy in the New Testament, you might have heard of him, his name's Jesus. Jesus gets arrested and he has to go before a ruler, a sub-ruler named Pilate. And Pilate is talking to Jesus like, what? How did you get here? Let's trade you out with someone else. This can't be the right person. Here's the point. Christians are called to be excellent in exile, above reproach, full of character and conduct. Now that doesn't mean you can't sin. That doesn't mean you shouldn't sin. Jesus says, as my Father is perfect, be perfect. And we're going to mess up, but just enshrine these things. We're going to be excellent. We should be excellent. Here's the danger, I think, of Daniel 3. People get all pumped up about Daniel 3, and they read Daniel 3 like, I'm going to be radical. I'm going to be radical. I'm going to be called out. I'm going to be different. And then they become anti-establishment, anti-culture, anti-authority, anti-other, anti-everything, anarchist of existence. And in a room this big, some of you are there. I hope that you're not so far gone you can't hear what I'm saying. You're probably just sitting there getting offended by what I'm saying, then you're going to talk bad about me later, and that's how we do it. I hope that you can still receive this and hear this. People aren't impacted by your difference if that's your difference. People don't even really notice your difference if that's your difference. It's been hidden, snubbed out by hatred. It lives under a bushel of uselessness. You being a jerk on social media, you ridiculing your family with slapdash opinions of superiority, they're meaningless. You have no platform. Your head plunged so deep into the sands of self-involvement long ago that eventually your body and being went with it. You and all your heavenly scruples have become no earthly good. The king doesn't kill these men, not because they're radicals, not because they're rude, not because they're offensive, not because they're writing open letters to every editor in town. It's because they're excellent. They're excellent. He likes them. They're kind. Martin Luther has ascribed a quote he probably didn't say, but it's still a good quote. He said, the Christian shoemaker isn't the person who puts little crosses on the shoes. It's the one who makes excellent shoes. We're called to be excellent artists, excellent musicians, excellent neighbors, excellent parents, excellent sponsors, excellent citizens. In their society, a corrupt society that's on the fall, these men have risen well. And then I love 14. It says, Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? And he's kind of getting on to them. You know, those aren't their names. Those are their Babylonian names. They have Hebrew names. And instead of being like, please call us by our Hebrew names, we only answer to our Hebrew names. No, They're like, yeah, you can call us that. That's what you want to call us? Okay. There's that quote, win in Rome, live as the Romans do. Well, win in Babylon, live as to an extent. They've taken on Babylonian culture and names. They've entered into Babylonian education. They've learned the Babylonian alphabet. They wear the Babylonian dress. Have they lost their identity? Well, no. But what they're doing is seeking the flourishing of their city. And we should too. We don't see wrongs in our city or wrongs in our culture, wrongs in our nation, and try and burn it down. We bring light to it. Excellence with whatever God has given us to steward. Is that you? Are you excellent? That's what you're called to be. You're called to be excellent. And some of you are like, well, I haven't been given that much. Okay. Some of you are like, I've been given a lot. It doesn't matter. It's what we do with what we've been given. We're called to be excellent. The New Testament phrases it this way. We're to be salt and light. Light to show people the way, and salt to season and preserve the culture where we've been embedded. To make it taste a little better, look a little bit better, last a little bit longer, because the goodness of the gospel is alive in it. But there are lines, right? You could hear this and be like, okay, I'm just going to be like everyone else. Cool, hands in. This is great. I love this church service. Awesome. There are lines. Do you know where the lines are? In the New Testament, we're called Christians. Christians could be translated as little Christ. Why are you little Christ? Because you imitate the behaviors of big Christ. You imitate the behaviors of Christ, so you're like Christ. So a Christian should be about what Jesus is about and against what he is against. And some things in culture, some things in life, this is abundantly clear. It's black and white, like murder. Christians should always stand against murder. There's no point in history where like, well, you know, it's kind of one of those gray areas. No, murder. And there's a lot of things like that we should gather and stand against and make sure we hold firm on. And then there's a bunch of gray lines, like or gray areas that lines are drawn. And that might not be for all of us. That might just be for some of us. We don't impose those things on others of us. Like if I have a line here that it's like, well, I follow this line, but maybe Russ doesn't need to follow this. That's okay, because it's not black and white. It's a gray area. That's all right. But there are lines everywhere, and we need to be looking for these lines and make sure we're standing firm on the right ones to be faithful. Like there's a guy named Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He had a line. He was an academic in the time of Hitler. And as Hitler was on the rise, here's his line. This is where he's like, I think this is a line. He would go to church, and they had timed the church bells to coincide with when the trains went past carrying the Jews to concentration camps, because they didn't want their church service to be bothered. They didn't want it to be a distraction to congregants. And he'd sit there and be like, this ain't the Christianity I know. I will not become a Nazi. In fact, I will stand firm and I will fight against this, because this is not right. He found the line. What about the Great Awakening in this country? Great Awakening was a series of revivals that happened. And from these revivals, a lot of things happened. But one of the things that happened is, especially for white people in this country went to these revivals, and they got all turned up on it, and then they're like, whoa, we're oppressing our black brothers and sisters. And so they joined with black churches, white churches and black churches joined together and like, we have to do something about slavery. How can we coexist? How can we get together? How can we unify as brothers and sisters in Christ and abolish slavery? We got to get rid of this practice. It's odious. They found the line. Or to do a biblical example in Acts 4, Peter and John are pulled before the rulers because they're preaching a bunch. And the rulers say, hey, first we're going to beat you. We're not going to kill you this time. We'll kill you next time if you keep talking about Jesus. And in 4:19 and 20, basically summarizing, this is my paraphrase, Peter says, can't stop, won't stop. He just laughs at them. He's like, okay, should I listen to you or God? Okay, that's funny that you told me to do that. No, I'm going to keep talking about it. They said, we just said we're going to kill you. He's like, yeah, I understand that you said that, but I'm going to keep talking. You could say, well, what about some everyday examples? Those are everyday examples for those people. For Bonhoeffer, it was like a Sunday where he's sitting there like, wait, this isn't right. For Peter and John, it's like a Tuesday they get brought out there. These are everyday lines for everyday faith are drawn every day. There will be lines drawn in your life this week for you to consider. For these guys in our story, they would not bow to other gods. And so once they decide not to bow to other gods, they have to choose a weapon, and their weapon of choice, well, is it a coup? Is it a picket? Is it an assassination attempt? Is it some kind of social media campaign? Again, to get some journalism involved. Here was their weapon that they chose. Love. Love can't buy me love. 16 and 17, look at their responses. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, The God we serve is able to deliver us from it. He'll deliver us from your majesty's hand. What a response. I'll paraphrase that one too. No, sir. You gonna bow? No, no, sir. No, your majesty, we're not. How about that agreeable disagreeableness? Isn't that beautiful? Their approach was with civility, with charity. Here's the thing, when we get really bent up on a thing, a line, and then we are yelling and screaming and fighting and all this stuff, it's not about the line. It's about us. We're trying to make it about us. We're self-interested in that. We're self-important in that. They're not. There's king, you're the king. Okay, you can say that, but we're not going to do it. There's this movie that was real popular called Office Space. Some of you may have seen it, some maybe not. Well, this guy realizes that there's a lot of bureaucracy in his job and it's kind of worthless. And this is a comedy. And all of a sudden he just decides he's not going to do any of it anymore. He's talking to this woman he wants to date at lunch. He goes, what's your job? And he goes, well, we get files updated for the Y2K swap. And he says all this stuff about it. And then she goes, oh, do you like your job? He goes, no, I'm not really going to do it anymore. She goes, oh, you're going to quit? He goes, no, I'm not going to quit. Not exactly. I'm just not going to do it anymore. And then he's talking to his boss. His boss is like, well, when do you come to work? He's like, well, I'm supposed to be here at 8. I show up about 8:45 whenever I roll in. He's just matter of fact about it. And that's how these guys are. They're just matter of fact, composed and confident about what they're doing. There's no strident desperation. And that lack of strident desperation, it feels a whole lot like truth. Here's the thing about truth. If it's true, it doesn't need a tantrum. And you know what kind of tantrums are the worst? Adult tantrums. Like my kid throws a tantrum, it's like, oh, okay, he's 5. When I see a 50-year-old throw a tantrum, it's like, there's no redeeming that. It just, come on. No, it's composed, confident. That's how they meet this king. And you know what the king's response is? I'm king. Don't you know? Don't you know who I am? Don't you see my resume? She shows him the photo ID. Look, it says king here. And they like pat him on the head. It's like the kid who dresses like his dad, like he wears a suit and he has a briefcase and he pretends he's going to work. You're like, yeah, you're going to work, buddy. But we all know it's not real. That's how they treat this king. They're like, okay, sure. I don't think they're like obnoxious or sarcastic, patronizing him, but it feels that way. And so he ratchets it up a little bit more. He says, I will kill you. That's like the trump card. That's his ace in the hole. He's playing that. And they're like, is that your big finish? Oh, you're going to kill us? And they just kind of giggle. I was thinking about this week. One of the things I'm thankful for is that my wife and I have decided, we didn't make this decision. I think we always were embedded with this decision, but then we've doubled down on it and we think about it. We don't want violence to rule our household. We're not going to be violent with our children. All right? We can talk about different discipline techniques or whatever. I'm fine with that. But we're not going to lead with violence and not going to lead with anger. We're not going to do violence on our children. I want to say it 100%. I'm so happy about that. Hear me. That is a good thing. What I realized this week, I'm not sure it's so good that our kids know that. Go to timeout. And he's like, no. And he's like, if you don't go to timeout, oh, you don't want to know what's coming. He's like, what? I'm like, I'll send you to timeout is what? I actually had one last week. We were watching the Mizzou game. My whole family was downstairs watching the Mizzou game together. Seems nice, right? Peaceful, 5 people just sitting there. Some of them are little people, unfortunately. And so we're watching the game, and right next to our TV, this is a parenting fail, is a keyboard. Yeah, some people are like, oh, what are you doing? We learned that after year 3. What are you doing? There's a keyboard. And so our kid who's 5 gets over there and he turns it on. He has a rule when he plays his keyboard, he can only turn it to volume 2. That's how loud this keyboard is. The volume 2 is enough. He turned it to volume 30, which is max. And then he turns on the automatic music. You know, those keyboards do that. And it's when the saints go marching in, and it wasn't saintly. When the saints go marching in, it's shaking our walls, and then you can make noises with it. And here's the thing I want to tell you. He plays the keyboard, but he doesn't play the keyboard. We're a non-musical family. We'll listen to music, but we don't do music. And he's just sitting there blaring on it, and I'm like, my eyes are getting big and bulging. It's like, what is happening? And so then I yell. I have to yell because the music's so loud. I wasn't even angry at that point. I said, hey, turn down the keyboard. And then you know what happens when you start yelling? You start getting mad, your ire gets up and the voice goes with it, and all of a sudden you have this temper. It's like when you go to a basketball game and you yell at the ref and it's funny with your friends, and by the end you're seething, and your spouse is like, let's go home, honey. You're kind of acting. That's how I was. I was getting madder and I kept yelling, he couldn't hear it, and then I said this, I said, I will break that keyboard. And then my wife, she looks at me and she starts trolling me. She goes, oh, really? You're going to break the keyboard, big guy? And that made me even more mad. So then I yelled this. This is a true sentence that came out of my mouth, yelling. The neighbors probably heard it. I will go get a hammer right now and bust that keyboard. You know what my kid did? Just kept playing. And you know what didn't make an appearance? A hammer. Didn't happen. I am the king at my household of empty threats. And that's what the world is to a Christian who's sold out for God. They can threaten a whole lot, but they're empty. Oh, you're going to get a hammer? Okay. Have fun with that. That's it. The world can only hurt us by taking or threatening what we worship. So if I only worship, there's no other God but God, I'm safe. I'm not safe. I'm living in danger, but it's not real danger. This is like fake. This is like movie danger, okay? This is my temporal existence. Ooh, you're going to threaten my temporal existence? Go for it. What are you going to do? Money, popularity, influence, life, these are fine things. These are good things, but they're not God things. They're not even close. So I love that passage where Paul says death has lost its sting. One thing he's talking about is that a believer is going to die and then a believer can go to heaven, so we don't have to be scared of death because we have this afterlife that stretches through eternity. That's one thing he's saying. But the other thing he's saying is making a point of this, that the worst thing any of us in this room will ever face is death. We're all going to die, and we're going to go at it alone. You might have someone holding your hand on your deathbed, but you're still going to die alone. You're the only one taking that plunge in that moment. Even if you die at the same time as someone else, your deaths are separate. You're going to go alone to death. It's the cruelest, hardest, worst part of the curse of humanity, that we are going to die. Nothing's close to that. Not cancer, not breakup, not job loss. Those are very serious, all right? But they're not as serious as death. And so death has lost its sting. Everything that's less than death has then lost its sting. You know what everything less than death is? Everything. For the Christian, there's the safety in the gospel that when you store up your treasures in heaven, guess what people can't get at? Your treasures. They're stored up in heaven. That's why their conviction is simple here. It's a matter of the fact. It's not some emotionally charged evil for evil yelling match, because they have a true confidence in God. And true confidence in God is not the stuff of strident memes. It's a meek power that goes further because it believes more. It's the same confidence we see in verse 18. Verse 18 is awesome, but even if he does not. So before that, 17, if we're thrown in the blazing furnace, God will deliver us. But even if he does not, we want you to know your majesty, kindness, civility, sir, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. You get that? In their paradigm, God is not held hostage. Like I say this to God all the time, like I will be obedient to you, I will be faithful to you if it comes with a small raise. I'll do this if I can have health. I'll do this if you protect my kids, if my kids can have health. I'll be faithful if it's not faithfulness. That's just a transaction. That's just a deal. We will be faithful because you are our God and we are your people. That's what they say. No strings, no caveats. We burn in that fire, he's just as much our God as if he plucks us out or just stomps out that fire right now. Job has this line. It's this great book. This guy, he gets his house smashed. He loses all his provisions. His family dies, many of them. All he's left with is a wife, and they don't seem to get along that well. And it's just like this terrible book, all this hardship. He's covered in boils, and he has this line, though you slay me, I will praise you. Though you slay me, I will worship you. That's faithfulness, and faithfulness is supposed to be rugged. Job has rugged faith. That's rugged faithfulness. In fact, they even made a song about rugged faithfulness. It's called Old Rugged Cross. That Jesus was faithful first. He was faithful to you. Do you get that? To you. He saw you and was faithful to you to death and beyond. It'd be funny if out of the tomb Jesus is like, I think I took this too far. That's not what he says. He pops out of that tomb and he's got like a no regrets tattoo on his forehead. There's no buyer's remorse in his purchase of you. Likewise, we are to be ruggedly faithful in poverty, in cancer, in isolation, in pain, in confusion, in grief, in success, in wealth, in life, in death. The story arcs we've been looking at are creation, fall, redemption, arrival. And here we have a kingdom, Babylon. Every kingdom is created, every kingdom falls, but those faithful to the everlasting kingdom of God, for them, redemption rolls down like a mighty water. Justice, truth, perpetual arrival, and sweet renewal. I love this too, because these boys are about to be passed through a fire. You know what you do with a fire? You pass things through a fire to burn off the imperfections, to refine it, to purify it. That's what God's doing for us. Though you slay me, I worship you. Or in other words, now this is the translation. No matter what, you're God. And no matter what, I'm yours. And I know all of us aren't believers in here. What if every believer left this place just with that on their hearts for this week? No matter what, you're God. No matter what, I'm yours. You think that won't make a difference in this world and how people look at you and what people see in you? It will. Come to verse 19. Nebuchadnezzar, of course, it doesn't just crush you when you're really trying to get someone and you can't get under their skin. They're just unbothered. These guys are unbothered. So he's furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual. This is funny because last week we were talking about this. We have a picture here, juxtaposition of controlled emotions. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have emotions, but they're controlled here. They're controlled because they're staked to something versus uncontrolled emotions. He has uncontrolled emotions. He has a religious fervor that's tied to nothing. And so it runs madly in all directions. And we see the difference here. So first he says, make it hotter. And I love that he makes it 7 times hotter because in the Bible, 7 is the number of completion. And we talk about purification. So spiritually, it's like make it hot, 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 hot. And they pass through, they're going to be perfectly purified from passing through this fire. He doesn't know that, but it's a cool little thing. But he says, make it hotter, which is ludicrous because he's mad. He wants to punish them more. You know what you do if you want to punish someone more who you're putting in a fire? You make it cooler so it lasts longer. It's more torturous. You can't hang someone twice. So just from a strategic standpoint, he is actually undoing what he's trying to do because, again, untethered emotions make unwise decisions. Second, he says, hey, get our best soldiers. They were soldiers yet once and young. Get these young, muscular soldiers, the very best ones, all the ones, the Navy SEALs, get them here. Now, did he need that? If he would have said to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, your punishment is the fire, go into the fire, they would have. This wasn't like a contentious thing. They weren't fighting, they weren't swinging, they weren't. Why did he need the best soldiers? Well, he didn't. But again, it doesn't compute because he's angry. And then he rushes, he says, bind them, tie them up. Didn't need to, but tie them up, throw them in the fire, hurry. Then we get verse 22. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The soldiers die. When we're emotionally reckless, when we bow to idols, here's the thing I want to point out with this. We could have a whole nother talk on this, but it's this. It's the young who suffer. The young suffer. When a nation forgets God, when idols are erected, when a church does, when a family does, it's the children who pay the tab. That's who pays the tab. You think about a church. If a church has a big thing go on and like, let's say a senior leader leaves in disgrace or just leaves, whatever. Well, what's going to happen is the people who are just there for that leader are going to scatter like roaches because they do. And then some faithful people will stay, and guess who's putting the pieces together? It's the faithful who remained. They're the ones who are dealing with the debt. They're the ones who are dealing with the corruption that was stayed. They're the ones who are dealing with all this. They're the ones who are paying ravaged. Or think about family situation. When parents yell at each other, when they do have violence in their house, or when they abuse one another, all this stuff, they end up going their separate ways, or they end up dying at some point. Guess who's still alive doing 40 years of counseling? And it's the children. It's the children who pay. The next generation is who suffers and dies. That's why it says the sins of the father will be revisited on the generations to come. So when we bow to idols, be thinking about it. It's the next generation that's going to suffer from the idols that we bow to. As a nation, as a church, as a people, as a family. We could do a whole nother talk on that about even this specific church and why it matters to steward well what we've been given. Why it matters to bow to the one true God and not the other gods. It's the youth. It's the ones who are coming up who need a place, a refuge, an alternate narrative. We can provide that. Verse 24 says, then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire? I love that tied up, okay? And we've skipped some verses, but if you go back and read this on your own, it depends on the translation, but bound is the word that's usually used, bound. Bound is used 4 or 5 times. When the Bible repeats something over and over again, they want you to see it. So they want this bound, 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 bound. Think about being bound. Think about handcuffs right now. Think about you wearing handcuffs, your life being handcuffed, all this stuff. It's setting something up for us, and that's verse 25. It says this. He said, Nebuchadnezzar, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound. Freedom. They went from non-freedom, restricted, to free. That's what we're talking about. That's what faith is. It's a freedom in Christ, unbound by policy, unbound by aesthetics, that the world can look really good and everything that glitters is not gold, and we can see that in our freedom. That the music of this world won't get us whipped up into an emotional fervor. That the fleeting, feckless agenda of this fading world has no power over us. We have been freed. And then 25 says, again, I see 4 men walking around unbound, unharmed. The fourth looks like a son of the gods. And there's theories on this. I'll just give you my take, and it's a lot of people's take. But this is not the first time this son of a god, later called an angel, shows up. Sometimes called the angel of the Lord. Like there's a scene with Abraham. Abraham's wanting to have a kid. He's praying to have a kid. He really wants to have a kid. His wife does too, Sarah. They just want to have a kid so bad. And all of a sudden this angel of the Lord comes and meets with them in a tent. It's like, you're going to have a kid. Or Moses, there's like this physical embodiment of God that leads them through the wilderness. Or Jacob, there's a time where he wrestles with God. Now, God is spirit and God is ethereal. We don't know quite what God's shape is. And so how's that wrestling match play out? Well, he probably wrestled with like this angel of the Lord, this other kind of physical embodiment. And so this person pops up time and time again within the Bible. And then the book of Malachi comes along, and then we don't see this person anymore. But then all of a sudden, after Malachi, you know who pops up? Out of the water, baptized? Jesus. And we never see, I think it's because Jesus showed up and removed the mustache. We're like, oh, that's the guy from the Old Testament. It's the same guy. Oh my goodness. Now it all ties together. That was him. And that's why we talked about last week, the Colossians verse that says, the Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. This angel of the Lord can be the pre-incarnate Jesus. We sang it in a song earlier. I wrote it down. You were the Word at the beginning. Jesus wasn't just born, he was pre-existent. He was born to Mary, but he was pre-existent. He was there at creation. Everything that was made through him. And he's there at the end. So what was he doing in the meantime? Just like playing solitaire and waiting for his moment? No, he's involved in the history of the world, and he's involved here. He pops into the fire with them. A foreshadow of where he's going to go through the fire again for us. And I love the image bookends because Daniel 3 starts with this image that's erected, this huge image that people are going to bow to. And then it ends with the real image of the invisible God showing up and being like, here's the real thing, guys. It might not look big and impressive. It doesn't come with musical fanfare, but it lasts through the fire. It's sturdy. It's stable. The true image of the invisible God. We see God not through idols, but through Jesus. And then like any good story, that's kind of like the climax. You know, he's in there, they're free, and then they get pulled out. And now we have the falling action of a story where it kind of tells us and ties up the loose ends. So we come to verse 28. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Nebuchadnezzar's changed. He's transforming. And what did it for him? Well, was it like an awesome church service? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with awesome church services. Don't get me wrong. Was it appearance or music like the other idol had? Let's play an awesome song and then people will bow. Let's make it look really pretty. Was it some emotional sleight of hand where someone plays with emotions and toys with it and gives them this talk or hypnotizes them or makes them feel? Was it a threat? You're going to get burned if you don't say this stuff? No, it was the words and deeds of believers. That's it. The everyday words and deeds of believers. They walk the walk with substance, with calm, with conviction, and they were unburned. And his heart is changed by seeing that witness, a witness that we all get to do if we want to. Tomorrow, you will get to do the same thing. You will get to pass through fires and hold Christ and be calm and convicted and unburned by the fires of this world. And someone will notice. And then I love the process of faith. Some of you are just like on the front foot of faith. You're trying it out, and it's like, be perfect now. And it's like, no. None of us will get there. We're going to fall a lot, and we see this. This guy's changed, right? The king is saying different things. His heart has changed. Now listen to what he says. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, or Abednego be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned to piles of rubble. Room for growth, all right? He's not throwing people in the fire anymore, but still like madman tendencies. We got to change some of that, all right? It's a process. We all have different starting points. It's important to remember. Though that's a joke in a way, we do have different starting points. If someone gets arrested at the age of 17 and they spend 30 years in prison and they have this different ethical code, and then they come out and someone else has been to Ivy League school and has all this money and has all this and has been trained and has a 2-parent household and all this stuff, those two people both come to Christ, they're going to talk a little different. Grace. Jesus didn't come and die so our behavior would be modified. He came and died so our hearts would be transformed progressively, and someday he will carry it through to completion what he began. That's what's happening to Nebuchadnezzar. So what are some takeaways? Takeaways real quick. First one, God is faithful. Yesterday, today, tomorrow. That we need to arrive to that dollar theater and we need to sit through the previews, but then we need to stay through the credits because we got an Alpha and Omega God. Jesus shows up throughout the Bible and throughout our lives. He doesn't miss a scene. He's there. God is faithful. Second, you can be too. Even when your culture bows, even when everyone around you is bowing, you can stand firm. Third, the fires will rage for the faithful. Now, the fires will look a different way. It might be social isolation. It might be some family withdrawal. I don't know. We'll all have different fires. But fourth, he's with us in whatever fire we encounter. I love this about the Great Commission. It says, go therefore and all the nations make disciples. Yeah. And then at the end, remember how the end goes? Lo, I will be with you always, even till the end of the age. Go, I'll be with you. Into the fire, I'll be with you. Into the sunset, I'll be with you. Into death, I will be with you. Fifth, we're better together. If I said, who's the second person in the story, you'd have to, what letter of the alphabet is O? You'd have to count. Same. Who's the second person in the story? Shadrach, Meshach. You have to say the first one. This is three's company. This is three guys, right? This isn't the story of one brave. It's three dudes together, united. And there's a fourth one who's absent, but they do stuff together too. But it's uniting. It's community. They need encouragement. I'm sure one of them was a little scared, we got summoned, and he's like, hey, it's okay. We got this. We're together. Let's go. Let's stand firm. You want to pray? Before we go meet the king, do you want to? They need each other for encouragement, for accountability, even for processing. That's why you do church, so you can process where the lines are. What is a line? What isn't a line? So we can walk the walk of faith together with conviction. And we have our fellow brothers and sisters to help us. It's the reason for church. So this series is called Restory. Spoiler alert, Babylon doesn't get restored. It falls. None of you are making vacation plans for the summer, yeah, we're going to Babylon. You're not. It's still a physical place on the map, but it's not called Babylon anymore. After Babylon, we're going to go to the Byzantine Empire and then visit Ottoman Empire. No. It's gone. When we think about restories, even in failing and falling cultures, there's pockets of redemption. Lives are changed. I love that verse in Revelation where it says, every tongue, tribe, and nation will bow before God. We'll be singing praises around his throne. That's not just every tongue, tribe, and nation in the modern day. It's every era. So someone from the Ottoman Empire, someone from Babylon, people from these places will be redeemed because the faithful witness of Christians who are there. And we get to see that. In chapter 4, he gives his story, Nebuchadnezzar's story. He ends up going insane and wandering around the wilderness for a bit. And he's telling that whole story and everything that's encountered to him, everything that's happened to him, and this influence that these Hebrew males have made on him. And he says this, now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right and all his ways are just, and those who walk in pride, he is able to humble. He's able to humble. Sounds a whole lot like the verses we've looked at in Luke 18 and Luke 14, where the proud, they will be humbled, either in this life or the next. But the humble, that's the synthesis of the gospel is you have to admit you're humble. You have to admit you're a sinner, and then from a sinner, you will be exalted. That's him. He is brought low so that he can be ascended high with the knowledge of Christ. And so it can be for all of us. Let me pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for these three men and their faithfulness. We thank you for your faithfulness first, that we are faithful because you were first. Faithful in our making, faithful in our provision, that even when we fall in sin, what you do the next few verses is clothe us. And then in the end, you'll give us new clothes to wear, clothes of your righteousness, that you are just there in every bit of the story, restoring us and offering redemption to those who will take it. And then once we take redemption, what we get to do is be your ambassadors and go offer it to other people. Not by fighting and kicking in doors and being loud and being obnoxious, but being faithful, true, composed, being bringers of peace. Think of Psalm 1. There's this tree that's planted beside the water. The tree is casting shade for others. It can give nourishment to others. It can give water to others. There's a stream right there. That's what we want to be in this world. That we're deeply rooted like that tree. The winds are going to come, but it's not going to knock us down. But we are places of provision and peace for our world. We are salt and light. Help us learn from this. Help us apply it to our lives in the way you see fit. Help anything we said that is unhelpful or untrue, just let's forget it before we even leave this room. But the stuff that is from you, let us hold on to and live our lives in accord. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
When my sorrow has been heavy and I'm broken to my knees, I will hold on to your promise. Everything can and will be redeemed. Yes, everything can and will be redeemed. When my sorrow has been heavy and I'm broken to my knees, I will hold on to your promise. Everything can and will be redeemed. Yes, everything can and will be redeemed. 'Cause my God is faithful, He's always beside me, mover of mountains. My God is mighty, Lord, you are able, so I will believe. Everything can and will be redeemed. Yes, everything can and will be redeemed. Lord, you found me in my failures, and your kindness rescued me. Oh, the goodness, oh, the mercy, everything can and will be redeemed. Yes, everything can and will be redeemed. 'Cause my God is faithful, He's always beside me, mover of mountains. My God is mighty, Lord, you are able, so I will believe. Everything can and will be redeemed. Yes, everything can and will be redeemed. I will trust in you, only you, Lord. I will trust in you. The battle is yours. I will trust in you, only you, Lord. I will trust in you. My God is faithful, He's always beside me, mover of mountains. My God is mighty, my God is faithful, He's always beside me, mover of mountains. My God is mighty, Lord, you are able, so I will believe. Everything can and will be redeemed. Yes, everything can and will be redeemed. Yes, everything can and will be redeemed.
As Matt said at the beginning, this is for you and for me, and for us to do something with the information. So information consumption doesn't lead to change or growing your faith. So I'm wondering, like, your takeaway may be different than my takeaway. But as we think about this story and some of the points, what is your anchor? I mean, is God your anchor, and do you want him to be? So Matt said the points. God is faithful. We can be too. The fires will rage. He is with us. we're better together. And I know it takes time. It's a process, and it's a lifelong process to build our faith. Beth Moore talks about this very story, and she says, for the believer, in every fire that we walk through, there are still 4 people: the believer, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So we have an anchor and we have help. So this week, the challenge is to take a look at your faith and see where you fall and what you need. Masood and I will be up here after the service is over. If you need prayer or you have any questions, we'd love to talk to you. Well, as you leave, I want to remind you, if you have not had your picture taken, head on over to the gym and we'll get your picture. And then as you leave, there'll be people with buckets to take your tithes and offerings. So thank you for coming, and we will see you next week.